How many of you guys are teaching in one-room schools? Just two of you? One-room schools? Three. All right, so I did, let me do the math here, 14 years in a one-room school setting. And when I graduated with my undergraduate degree in teaching, I was certain that I would just be teaching in a self-contained classroom, just a single grade. When I went into the program. As I went through the program, some of my teachers were honest with me and said, hey, so within the world of Seventh-day Adventist education, the probability of you working in a single classroom is pretty slim. It's pretty slim because there's three of you guys. The rest of you guys are obviously all teaching multi-grade. So are you in some iteration of like 1 through 4 classrooms and then 5 through 8? Any of you have the fun 1 through 2 split and then 3 through 5 split? That's a fun one. No, okay.
4 to 5.
Okay, 4 and 5. 4 and 5 is better than 3 through 5. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to present the content here, and then at the end of today, I want to talk about some strategies that you can implement to make it as user-friendly as possible for the multi-grade setting. So I may speak in sort of broad, generalized terms about making it user-friendly for multi-grade, and my hope is that you can utilize my suggestions in ways that will be effective in your classroom, okay? Because the program really is divided up into components which can be taught asynchronously or providing resources to students so that they can work independently on things. So that's one piece of the program. And then there is a component of the program that is very much predicated on the idea of you engaging in what I will refer to several times today is, direct, explicit instruction. And so I think that the balancing piece in this program is understanding how you can engage your students in meaningful academic work that they can be doing independently while you engage in direct, explicit instruction with students in the areas of like phonics or reading workshop, or guided reading specifically, okay? Because those are areas that I'll dive into more here in a minute, but those are areas where you cannot just send a kid off into a corner to learn how to read. All right, so I feel like now that everyone's logged in, my computer's gone to sleep, and then we will dive in here. So the first thing that I want us always to do, if you look at the beginning of these DLGs, there's always a focus for the unit. And I like to do this because it gives a flavor. It allows you to kind of think about a flavor that you want to incorporate into everything you're doing throughout the course of the unit. You won't, if you were to look at one of these, unless you had the exact one, which I think this is one for a single shard. Yours would have a little bit of a different faith connection. But if you can read in there and look at that closely, you can see, so there's a big idea here. An essential question and then a big idea. How do our life experiences help us grow closer to God? That's the essential question that we're going to be asking ourselves through the course of this unit. And then the big idea is that God expresses his love by helping us grow through life's experiences. So understanding that at the very beginning of any one of your units sort of sets the stage for you to ask those questions or bring about response opportunities in the context of teaching to tie kids back into this essential question and affirm this idea about God expressing his love. And if you look underneath this, and this page looks similar on all of them, you can see the essential question here and the big idea. Then you have this wheel down below, which again just talks about a series of thoughts that help us realize the answer to that essential question and giving emphasis also to the big idea that's present there too. So in this idea there, in this slide here, you can see that this unit is exploring the idea of a very important tenet within Adventist theology or our belief system, which is this idea that we are created, that we've fallen short of the expectations God's put before us, that we stand in need of redemption, and that God has promised to make us a new creation. And that little wheel can be expressed several times throughout the unit too. So I like this because it helps us also to create content or present content to our students that's uniquely Christian, but also, I believe, uniquely Seventh-day Adventist too, and I think that's nice. So, scope and sequence. If you're not familiar with this, the very first thing I would invite you guys to do when you pick up the DLG is to open it up and start looking at the table of contents. Because the table of contents will give you a brief overview of what each day in a week of school looks like. Okay? So as you can see here, this table of contents is showing, okay, so we have week 1, and then day 1 there. Sorry about the resolution, by the way. I was going through this as a participant last night, and I realized the resolution on these are not the highest of quality, so I apologize for that. Hopefully you're able to get the basic idea, though. So you can see here that week 1 has the word study, and then the 2 components of the reading program, the workshop, and then the small group instruction component, and then writing workshop. So that's a basic kind of overview. You can see that you have 4 weeks in a unit. Is that true, by the way, across the board? I believe that is true across the board. It's been a little while since I've taught some of the lower grade DLGs.
5.
Is it 5? Sorry. Thank you. There you go. So you have one with 5. What level is that DLG? Oh, it is grade 5? And there's 5, okay. This is a 6th grade one, and there's 4 in this Amos Fortune.
You said that's 5 weeks or 5 what?
Yeah, I'm saying you should look at the table of contents and look at the number of weeks that are in the unit as a reference for your kind of scope and sequence. Won't always be a perfect month, right? So, all right. So, the basic breakdown of the program, of the entire overarching program, is word study. There's a word study component, and if you were looking at the table of contents, you would have seen, oh yeah, day 1 has a word study component. Oh, it also has a reading workshop component, which is broken into whole group reading. By the way, whole group reading instruction, this is where the thematic content is addressed. This is where the big ideas about the thematic content are kind of brought in group discussion. And then there's small group reading instruction, and this is where the explicit reading instruction takes place. So, but that all falls under the category of reading workshop, okay? And then there's writing workshop. So those, I mean, it's semantics. You could think of it as 3 areas, but really I would encourage you to think of it really as 4. Because the difference between whole group reading instruction and small group reading instruction is colossal. And actually, the difference between whole group reading instruction and small group reading instruction for 1 through 4, for that category, is very, very different than whole group and small group reading instruction in 5 through 8. I'll talk about this again, but in 1 through 4, it flips. Like the bulk of the direct instruction in 5 through 8 actually comes in whole group instruction. There's almost no guidance at all in 5 through 8 for small group reading instruction. Okay, so that's just, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but anyway, so there's 4 components of the program. The word study, the reading workshop, which has 2 pieces in it, right? And then the writer's workshop, okay? Awesome. So, I have a little quiz here for you. See, I'll say this again. Whole group instruction, right, is where the big thematic ideas are discussed. Small group reading instruction is where explicit direct reading instruction takes place. So on this next slide here, let's see if you guys can click and drag some words around to see if I got that. See if you can get this right. You won't be able to see. No one will be able to see your scores are right there on the board. I'm going to see if I can not do that. Let's see if it's actually showing student scores. All right, Emily. So it is showing scores. I apologize about that. No stress or anything, guys. No stress. No stress. I attended actually a training on Nearpod with like 50 other educators from around America, and they gave us quizzes, like parts of speech quizzes, and they assured us that no one's name would be shown. And then they had to apologize because several people's names were shown, including mine. And then my IT administrator was there with me, and he was making fun of me because apparently I don't know what a preposition is. But I do. I was like, no, my hand slipped. Anyway. All right. In the interest of time here, everyone's doing great there, and we're going to go on to the, I'm always scared when I go to the next one. Like, I'm not done, Mr. Thorne. Are we good? I'm going to move on here, okay? I'm going to move on here. You guys get the point. All right, so the breakdown: word study, reading workshop, and writing workshop. Word study. There are 3 pieces to the word study: vocabulary activities, spelling activities, and phonics. Question: which of those 3 do you think are going to require you to engage in direct, explicit instruction? Absolutely, phonics. Okay. Would you agree, just thinking kind of creatively right now, that there could be components of vocabulary instruction and spelling instruction that could be designed to allow students to work independently? Yeah. Is there going to be some requirements there for some direct instruction time, and maybe at least in setup? Absolutely. There's sorting activities that need to be done in vocabulary and spelling. Depending on the type of program that you create for both of those, there will be some times where direct instruction is necessary. But can you count on potentially there being some time during the day to have students engaged in vocabulary and spelling activities while you're doing direct instruction with phonics? Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want you to start thinking about this program as being in one of those two categories. What aspect can I have my students engaged in doing work independently versus where do I absolutely need to be 100% involved in instruction? All right, so let's parse this out a little bit here. If you were to look at your DLG at day 1. And by the way, I do want to show you here, as you leaf through this, before you dive into any of the content, the specific content, it gives you a week at a glance, okay? And the week at the glance gives you word study. That's what we're talking about right now. And then it will say, oh, you have vocabulary things here, you have spelling things that you need to accomplish here. And as you look through the week, you can start seeing, oh yeah, so there's activities here, and they have black line assignments that are in the back here, and it says right there. So if you're planning your week, this is always where you want to look first, okay? I actually do, when I utilize this resource, I did most of my planning off of this, because it doesn't only tell you what you're doing in each one of the content areas, it tells you which assignments specifically you need to do, and also where the assignments are correlated in the back in the index where you can make photocopies and reproduce them for your students. So do not skip over that. I always tell my students in academic reading, like in science and social studies, like, I don't know if this was just me, but when I was a kid reading out of like my science or social studies book, I'd always look at the amount of reading I had to do, and if there was like a figure or like a table on the page, I was always like, oh, that doesn't even count for reading. I don't even have to read that. And I always tell my students, a lot of times that table will have the most important information you need in it, because it's like a distillation of everything else on that page preceding or everything else coming. If you're gonna skip anything, actually don't skip anything, but definitely don't skip the table. The table is a distillation of your week. Will this be repeated somewhere? Will day 3 spelling activity, week 1 word cards, appendix A, be somewhere else in here later on in the week explicitly shown? Yes, it will, but it's here in one location for you. This is a great scope and sequence tool. Great scope and sequence tool. So, boy, 8 minutes. Vocabulary. Okay? Now I included the standard here, LA8, L5. Okay? The first part of that, by the way, the LA8 is not a part of a standard that you would see correlated to the Common Core state standard, but the last part, the L5 or the 8, L5 is. And I want you to start being comfortable with an idea, if you weren't already. If you're teaching in multigrade and you are not yet comfortable planning your instructional content based on standards, I want to invite you to start getting comfortable with that, okay? Because this program could be taught by correlating that standard to resources that exist out in the world of Teachers Pay Teachers. Can I get an amen for Teachers Pay Teachers? Okay? There's no shame in that, folks. If you don't know Teachers Pay Teachers, you need to get to know them, okay? This LA8, L5 can be typed into Nearpod. You can go and type that into Teachers Pay Teachers, that code. Bam, just tons of, no, you don't have to search by content. You can search by the standard, and bam, it's right there. So I want to make sure that that's a piece that you understand too. And I'm going to teach this program as if you can utilize it as a standalone program, okay? But what I'm telling you is that, I'm looking over at Dr. Horton. What I'm telling you is that you should feel free to utilize the given standards to fill in the pieces of the program that need to be filled in, or to make the program relevant to the needs of your students. Or, the final thing I'd say, is to make it multi-grade user-friendly as well. So don't be afraid to do that. So there are provided worksheets in Appendix A, at the back of the book, Appendix A, which, by the way, I get a box cutter and I cut out my entire appendix. That sounds terrible. That's a soundbite that could be shared online. He took a box cutter and cut out his appendix. At the end here, I take them because I want to be able to reproduce them, scan them, and photocopy them, copy them really, really quickly. Okay? Hole punch them, put them in a 3-ring binder. Makes it a little more user-friendly. So there are vocabulary worksheets that are provided in Appendix A that will correlate to the what? The anchor text. Yes?
You can also get that.
There are digital options, yes, that's true. Amen. Yes, everything is now available as a digital option. Thank you, Emily. Anchor text, and the text activity correlates to standards listed here. So what we're going to do on this next page is play a little game here. Now this correlates to the same standard that I just showed you. And could you use the resource in the back of the book, or the digital option, as Emily pointed out? Yes, you could. But could you also do this game with your students, which is matching definitions to different forms of figurative language? Of course you could. And you're welcome to play this game if you want, in case you are feeling excited about that. Can I give you a little hint? I teach my students this with vocabulary too. Don't match the definition to the word, match the word to the definition. So I'd read the red phrases and match it to the purple phrase. That's a little funny teaching trick that is talked about a lot in literature. And it's just funny because a lot of kids will approach vocabulary acquisition by trying to match the other way around. Even a lot of tests are laid out that way too. Like matching tests are left to right. They'll put the word on the left, and I'll just tell my kids, if that's how it's set up, read the definitions first and match the other way. There's no rule against that. You'll find it's easier, generally speaking, unless it's not, in which case, it's okay. Oh, the score. So I'm going to stop showing the score to everyone. If you ever want the instructions out of the way, right here, see a little up caret here with the instruction? You can hit that and then the whole screen will be visible. Compares two things using like or as is obviously a simile. Makes a comparison between two things that are seemingly unrelated is a metaphor. Whew. Imagine how brutal that would be. Phrases that have special meaning within a culture is an idiom, right? And then words, when words are used in a way that is different from their literal meaning, is figurative. And then I wonder what the last two are. By the way, this software will pause a student's screen if they're trying too quickly. You guys are familiar with Quizlet? You know, there's like a game where you're matching at the end, and a lot of kids can get on the leaderboard by literally just clicking on their screen like that. And like, dude, I did everything in a minute. I'm like, well, I mean, did you? No, you didn't. So this will actually be like, time out, slow down. I'm going to move on here in the interest of the fact that I have 2 minutes left. So here's an example of a teaching strategy that's provided in the DLG, okay? So this is actually an example of a vocab worksheet that's taken from Appendix A. They give the words, less blurry in real life, the parts of speech, and then a definition. So it's like the same kind of approach, or the same objective is being realized. It's just if this isn't a way that you want that to happen, then you can utilize other resources that are available to you. Okay, so word study, vocabulary, also includes spelling, okay? And there are provided worksheets also. I'm not in again, so let's try that again. Here we go, helps when you plug in the cord. Really helps when you don't step on it. Luckily for you guys, it should still be on your screen, so I teach online, and this is an amazing resource online to keep kids engaged in work. If you haven't explored the joys of Nearpod and you have some resources at your school, I would definitely encourage you to look into it. Appendix A, which correlates spelling words again to the anchor text and to other things as well. They actually are identified. The list of words are actually identified as either anchor text vocabulary, academic vocabulary, or just your old run-of-the-mill grade level kind of spelling list, or word, I'm sorry. The next activity that we're going to do after I show you the screen here explores Latin root words, which in this lesson it would have been a part of anyway, and then we'll take a break, or I'll go over a little bit. Anyway, but here on this page you can see word study. Again, if you had the book in front of you, you would see how this page correlates to any one of those week at a glance pages. There's word study, spelling, and then it says, it would say a little concept and idea, and then it might even give a standard as well. And so what I did is I just took the standard here, as I lean in nice and close, LA8, L4, and I created this assignment here, which correlates with this idea of Latin roots. So here we're matching Latin roots together with there are other word parts to create words. Anth and root words, morph root words, and outliers are ones that just don't fit into the right spots. And then it says, or just distribute the copy of the 3-column word sort printable here in Appendix A. And of course, all they would do there is put anth, morph, and then outliers. There's always outliers, right? Always outliers. And it's important to know and teach students that that is part of reality. Here's the other DLG example. So on the left there is a word, is a list that would be provided in your appendix, in the appendix at the end. They would cut them all up, Actually, I don't know if these words necessarily correlate to the previous lesson. I'm just kind of showing you the layout of how the words may be provided in the appendix for you. But you can see on this that they have, I can actually see the pixels on this, that they, I'll come back over here, that they're identified as being anchor text vocabulary, academic vocabulary, or just the spelling pattern word. And they would probably, in this assignment, be putting them into, they'd be sorting them into one of those 3 categories as well. But again, the explicit instructions for this assignment would be in the DLG, and then this would be in the, provided in the appendix. So if I were teaching this, I would utilize a lot of these resources, but if I were teaching in a multi-grade classroom with lots of students, I would also grab the standard associated with this, and I would look for content that's already available to me to make sure they're understanding and fulfilling the requirements of that standard. Now, the challenge with spelling words, obviously, is that if the spelling words and vocabulary are correlated to the anchor text, then there's some assumption that there's a connection that needs to happen between those vocabulary words and the content you're covering in the anchor, or the ideas and the vocabulary associated with the anchor text. So you would want to not completely go and do your own thing for vocabulary. But I can tell you that, and I was just talking with someone at this table, about spelling. In multigrade, one of the challenges you'll have with spelling is that, if you don't know this, you'll know this. You'll figure this out quickly. You can have a 5th grader, right, that's not spelling on a 5th grade level. You can, she may be way, have some church up in here. They could be way ahead, they could be way below. And so the issue, my personal issue with the idea that the Pathways program would want to provide a standalone spelling solution is that spelling is never, spelling is rarely tailored for the needs that an individual student would have in your classroom. Even if you were teaching in a single grade classroom, you would still have to differentiate what you're doing with spelling, okay? So, dare I say that I believe there would be more leeway for you to create a spelling program that works for you while making sure to incorporate the given vocabulary components in the DLG, because the vocab components will correlate to the anchor text. And the anchor text and the activities associated with whole group instruction that go along with the anchor text actually generalize very well across a broad spectrum of grades. I mean, I love teaching the salamander room, not just to my lower graders, but my upper graders, and we can talk about big thematic ideas that are in that book, big ideas about literacy and reading and the author's purpose and foreshadowing and all these ideas that are not going to be a part of the conversation I'm having with a 1st or 2nd grader, even though I'm using the book for 1st and 2nd grade to have those conversations. Yeah?
Can you define anchor text?
So the anchor text is the book that goes along with the DLG.
That's the anchor text.
Yes, this is the anchor text. And this is the book that is used in grades 1 through 8 for whole group instruction. Okay? So this is not where in grades 1 through 2, this is not where you teach a student how to read. Of course, you wouldn't teach a 1st or 2nd grader how to read out of the book David Livingstone anyway, but the anchor text is not the book you're using to teach reading, okay, for kindergarten 1st and 2nd graders. It's the book that you use to talk about big thematic ideas about the DLG that you're working on, or big thematic ideas concerning reading and literacy, author's purpose, and all that kind of good stuff. So it's more of like creating an opportunity to have a conversation with your students, but it's not where you teach explicit reading instruction. And yes, so each DLG, I gotta plug this in or be faster between takes here. Each DLG has an anchor text that goes along with it. And it is, in fact, the name at the top of the DLG. Okay? So here we have grade 6 heroes, thematic, and the Amos Fortune is the anchor text that goes along with it. Whole group instruction. This is the whole group instruction. It's not the book you hand to your kid and then just know that magically at the end of it, or serendipitously at the end of it, they're going to just know how to read. This is the book you hand. That's the one that uses magic. This is the book you hand them and then have a conversation about literacy and reading and author's purpose and some of the bigger ideas that exist in the world of literacy and reading. So, here we go, the biggie. Part of word study is phonics, you guys, phonics instruction. And I've gone back and forth with this a lot, and I think I've cued into this finally. But the phonics instruction really drops off, obviously, after 3rd grade, okay? It starts to drop off after 3rd grade. There are some phonics standards. If you get the foldable standards, I think it was it 2015 when they did them last? The ELA standards? It's like a folder. Have you seen it? It folds out into a beautiful tri-folder, whatever. Do we have those anywhere? You'll see that phonics, that the ELA phonics standards start dropping quickly after 3rd grade, which makes sense, right? The impetus of instruction for literacy and reading changes in 4th, 5th, and going on, okay? And I was talking with Emily about this the other day too. I'm like, where's the phonics piece of this? And that's a problem, the fact that I don't know where the phonics piece is. But I looked. Most of the phonics instruction in the standalone program in grades K, 1, 2, and 3 happens in the spelling part of the DLG. So if you're looking at word study, okay, you got word study, oh, here's spelling. Look through the days and the week of spelling to see what concepts about phonics are being taught. Now, Dr. Horton left.
She went to get your phone.
Yeah, I know, I'm just gonna say something here. I would say it in front of her too. It's not enough, you guys. It is not even close to being enough. The phonics instruction that is in the DLG, in the spelling program, is not enough to produce readers. It is just not enough. And there are lots of resources that are available to you that I'll talk about later. We'll go through some of those resources. Luckily, the standards that Dr. Horton's going to get are listed there. And you can go to Teachers Pay Teachers, you can go to Nearpod, you can go to any resource that's out there that has collected teaching content and type in those standards and create entire lessons. I mean, I'm just telling you that if you leaned exclusively on the phonics components of this program out of the DLGs and hoped to produce readers at the end of it, it would happen serendipity. It would happen in spite of the provided content instead of. Now, I will say that I believe, thank you so much, 2013, that the program does explicitly allow you to augment it and to work with resources like Shall Pop Phonics, which is one that was actually the first Pathways program was related to that. This is not a trifold. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a 5-fold. But you can see here in the reading, RF Reading Foundations, RL Reading Literature, and then RI, which is. Oh, okay. That may be, I can also leave it up here too, but as you're doing some planning, because you are going to do some planning today, right? The standards that are listed right in here, particularly last part, like RF3, which is phonics and word recognition, or RF2, which is phonological awareness, or RF1, and then 3rd grade, there is some phonics here that is a part of what we need to be instructing with. But you can go in and find lots of resources to fulfill those objectives that will definitely increase the quality of the phonics component for the program. Sorry, Dr. Horton, did you have a comment?
Yes, the move to standards-based learning. Standards-based learning will not be opposed or, averse to what's here, so I just kind of want to.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is the trajectory the NAD is on. They want teachers to not be in a position to lean so heavily on textbooks. And I'm just saying that even if that were your objective with this program, you could do it pretty well with the exception of the phonics piece. You need to look to ways to buoy it up.
Put in some links and patches.
Thank you. Perfect. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. Appreciate it. All right, so that is, we already had our break. You guys are like, okay, great, let's go. No, so we got close. It said break. I'm going. Anyway, so reading workshop. We are a little behind here, but we're going to get through this. Reading workshop. Ready? Forget the time. Forget the time. Okay, you're going to hold me to that. 10:30. Actually, I do think I have to be done by 10:30, don't I? Okay, Dr. Warren's like, yes. Here we go. This is where whole group, remember I said there were two pieces of the reading workshop, right? Whole group and small group. Whole group instruction is where the anchor text, the book that goes along with each DLG, right, lives. Whole group instruction is the world of the anchor text. I do love this part of the program, especially with 5 through 8. Actually, I love it with everyone, it's great. This is where the anchor text lives, okay? This is where you get to explore, like I had mentioned, the big thematic ideas and concepts that are present within the DLG. It's where you get to talk with your students about overarching big ideas concerning reading and literacy. It's where you get to also, this is important, make that connection with your students between the thematic content in the DLG and their own personal lives. Right, to make it relevant for them. A lot of the conversations that are in there with whole group instruction with the anchor text are doing that. You know, think about the thematic idea of a hero and tying that into a student's life and the impact that could have on engaging them in the learning process. And it's also, I put here the last bullet, it's also where, in 5 through 8, where most of the direct instruction takes place. I'm going to step very briefly on a soapbox here. Our standardized test, I know you guys are new to multi-grade teaching, but I don't know where you guys are in the world of teaching in terms of experience. How many of you guys have administered the NWA MAP growth tests yet? Okay, so those standardized tests, one of the areas that they measure is reading. Not surprisingly, certain areas within reading where that assessment is looking at in grades 5 through 8 start to come down. They start to drop. After like 4th, 5th grade, they start to come back again in like 8th and 9th grade. Again, I'm talking in big general terms here. Part of the reason why is that I don't think that our teachers in grades 5, 6, 7, and 8 are doing enough content area reading instruction. So that means if you're a science teacher, guess what? You're also a reading teacher. If you're a social studies teacher, guess what? You're also a reading teacher. That's content area reading instruction. That doesn't happen enough explicitly, generally speaking. You might be doing it, that's great. The other thing is that, and I'm guilty of this too, so I'm telling you that I have done this myself. When you're teaching in multi-grade where you have a bunch of young kids that really need a lot of direct explicit instruction and reading, and you have older students who are able to read independently, the tendency is to hand them their box book, their self-selected reading, and let them engage in that, which is valuable. Allowing your students to have the opportunity to read independently, learn the joy of reading is an important thing to do, but they cannot miss out on that whole group instruction time in 5 through 8. It's where they learn, it's where they have the direct instruction they need to learn those big ideas about literacy and reading and author's purpose, foreshadowing, a lot of these writing strategies that are going to matter very much for them on standardized tests and as they move into high school and having ideas about some of those concepts and ideas. They're not going to get that if all you ever do for your 5th through 8th graders is give them a book to read independently while you teach phonics and small group and reading workshop to your lower graders. So make sure you recognize that there's a need for that. All right, here we go. So in the DLG, you do have reading workshop listed right underneath word study. Okay? And depending on the grade you're in, it could look a little different, right? The reading workshop does start with whole group instruction. It has a suggested little comprehension mini lesson a lot of times. A lot of times it'll also be tied to a standard. How many of you can see a little standard there where it has like the mini lesson? Like an LA and then a number afterwards? Okay, good. If you look through the week, right? If you look through the week, you'll start seeing that both the whole group the whole group reading instruction has ideas, right, and content that can be covered through the entire week with suggested worksheets that exist in the back, right, of the text, but also discussion pieces. If you were to go in to the DLG, for example, on day one, or whatever, let's say day one, it may have an actual script that you read to your students that provides the opportunity to have a discussion with them about what the anchor text is talking about. So it's there. It's there for you, and that's a great resource. I mean, I love doing things creatively, and that was a fun way of saying that. And then sometimes I'm just glad someone's done it for me. And so I like how I say sometimes. It's most of the time. But seriously, guys, it's there, and it's a great resource. The script is there. You know, say this to your students. Read this portion together. Ask these questions. It's right there. So this is all of that is there underneath the reading workshop, whole group. And also, I want you to look at something here. This top little piece right here, that box right here, at least on my screen, because it says something really important about whole group instruction. What does it say? To support what? Collaborative discussions that are about the anchor text, right? And they should be conducted as, I mean, this is not strange, whole group should be conducted as whole class activities. And then if needed, if you have a massive classroom, maybe divide those also into a cycle too. Most of you are not going to be in that position, though. Just the fact that you're in a small or in a multi-grade school, I don't think any of you are in that position. So whole group instruction is all about collaborative discussion. Whole group instruction, is about collaborative discussion. Reading the anchor text should be conducted as the whole class activity, if needed, in small groups or pairs. So, true or false? Anchor texts are the foundation of small group instruction and should be used in guided reading. This is one of those that I won't show the answer. This is like my moment. Anchor texts are the foundation of small group instruction and should be used in guided reading.
False.
Good, so false. There's always one student that shouts out the answer. No, you're good. No, you're good. She's right, though. It is false, right? It's false. Obviously, guided reading is direct, explicit instruction on how to, especially in those lower grades, how to read, okay? Here's another example. This is a comprehension mini lesson that exists right there in the DLG. This is probably for an upper grade level because you can read the objective, right? Your DLG, unless you have the same DLG that I took this amazing award-winning picture of, it will be a little different, right? But you can see that box is where the idea would be. It says, cite the textual evidence that most strongly supports an analysis of what the text says. And then you look, it has an assignment that correlates to Appendix C there. You see that? It says a reading excerpt is provided in Appendix C. So you could go to the back of your book and find an assignment provided that will help fulfill the requirements of LA8RI1, okay? We're actually not going to do this drag and drop activity. It's super intense and very long, but it correlates to that standard LA8RI1. So LA8 is what grade? I know, everyone's like nervous. LA8 is not a trick question, it's 8th grade. So I typed that into Nearpod and it brought up a reading excerpt and then it provided a table where students then had to drag and drop different pieces of the story, one that either supported a belief or a belief that was supported by evidence, and it's a great activity that you could use if you didn't want to use the resource in the back. Could you use the resource in the back? Absolutely. Could you look at the resource in the back and be like, we need a little bit more. We need something to kind of buoy this up a bit. Absolutely. Could you create your own activity? Sure you could. Sure you could if that's something you want to do. But we're not going to, I'll show you what it looks like. You would click on this PDF right here. It's a pretty dense document. But then you would then see here's the textual evidence is missing, but the analysis is here. So you'd click and drag one of these over here and say, oh, the analysis is that the author's description of the setting and the weather contrasts the feelings of the main character, which emphasizes how agitated the character is with this routine. And then you can give evidence for that. We're not going to do it, okay? Because the reading itself is more time than I'm able to provide for you. But again, here's the DLG in the back. So I'm just showing you guys that if you want to lean on this document, the DLG, to find resources to fulfill the requirements, go for it. You can do it. You can do it. But if you're more, if you want to explore the freedom of augmenting it or making it more challenging or just fulfilling the same requirement in a different way, then the opportunity to do that is definitely there too. By the way, the reason why I'm emphasizing this so much is because I think you will find in multigrade that it will be necessary to scaffold content for kids that need the help and to differentiate your lessons to meet the needs of your students. That would be true if you were teaching in 25th graders. You'd still have to do that. But it's very true if you're teaching kids in a multi-grade setting. And so knowing that you can look at the standard right there in the DLG and find ways to help them realize that objective is valuable to you, because if the standard says LA 8 RI 1, and you have an 8th grader that's not ready for that, could you still do RI 1 at a 7th grade level? Could you still do RI 1 at a 5th grade level? Are they still getting the content that they need for that? Yes. And as multi-grade teachers, I know that you may not be in a position to be at the moment enthusiastic and excited about standards teaching, but any teacher that's taught in multigrade for a long time knows that the alternative, right? The alternative is like 65 lesson plans a day.
Don't forget you have to grade them too.
Thank you. If you have 6 grades in your class and you're teaching 6 different content areas, are you really gonna make 40 lessons a day? You need to think about how you can teach a concept and an idea to your entire class and then level the assignments, differentiate the assignments that you have to meet the students' needs, which may be, if you're lucky, correlated to the grade level they're in, but more likely just where they are academically and what they need. So being in that headspace right now is a good idea, and it is the direction the NAD is going anyway. Okay. So I'm going to do a little activity here with you guys. This is why I wanted to skip the other one. But the activity you're doing now is taken directly out of the DLG for this book here as the anchor text, which is a book called A Single Shard. And the DLG, the Daily Lesson Guide, states that we're going to be looking at the author's purpose. Now again, this is whole group instruction, right guys? This is whole group instruction. And the activity here is literally for me to read chapter 1 of a single shard, chapter 1, which is the anchor text, to my class. And you guys are my class. But before we do that, I thought I would take you guys on a little virtual field trip. This book takes place on the west coast of Korea, the Korean Peninsula, South Korea. And if you've never traveled there, I have not, but this next screen will kind of show you a garden in Korea. And here's a tree that has these Does anyone know what those are? Has anyone traveled to Korea or understand the cultural significance of these? I don't. Okay, no one does. In a lot of ways, it looks very similar to Michigan, doesn't it? There's some things that are the same. What do you notice that's different, though? Well, what wouldn't you typically see? Oh.
Different from Michigan?
Yeah. There's no snow, okay.
Well, depending on,
Yeah, the season, that looks different. The structures look different, right? You can zoom in on it if you want to. Anyway, there's some differences. This is kind of like a traditional dwelling here in Korea. That's quite different than any home I've seen, although I'll be honest, I kind of want it. Look at that grass roof. I think that might be one of the baskets they use for collecting rice. It's beautiful though, isn't it?
It's for fish.
Is it for fishing? Okay. I think the rice ones are much smaller.
There is no grass.
I don't see grass, yeah. That's kind of cool. Anyway, you know why I did that, right? Just to get you guys into a headspace where you can enjoy this here. A small village on the west coast of Korea, mid to late 12th century. Chapter 1. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. I actually did that wrong. I wrote 12. I did definitely say 20th. The book is definitely the 12th century. I will fix that in the future, but thank you. Hey, Trier, have you hungered well today? Crane Man called out as Trier drew near the bridge. I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to interact with you the way I would interact with my students, okay? The well-fed of the village greeted each other politely by saying, "Have you eaten well today?" Trier and his friend turned the greeting inside out for their own little joke. Trier squeezed the bulging pouch that he wore at his waist. He had meant to hold back the good news, but the excitement spilled out of him. "Crane Man, a good thing that you greeted me just so now, for later today we will have to use the proper words." He held the bag high. Trier was delighted when Crane Man's eyes widened in surprise. He knew that Crane Man would guess at once. The only thing could give a bag that kind of smooth fullness. I'm going to reread that. He knew that Crane Man would guess at once. Only one thing, there we go, could give a bag that kind of smooth fullness. Not carrot tops or chicken bones, which protruded in odd lumps. No, the bag was filled with rice. Crane Man raised his walking crutch in a salute. "Come, my young friend, tell me how you came by such a fortune. A tale worth hearing, no doubt." Trier had been trotting along the road in his early morning pursuit of the village rubbish heaps. Ahead of him, a man carried a heavy load on a jigga. Okay. An open-framed backpack made of branches. On the jigga was a large woven straw container, the kind commonly used to carry rice. Trier knew that the rice must be from last year's crop. In the fields surrounding the village, this season's rice had only just begun to grow. It would be many months before the rice was harvested, and the poor always gleaned in the fallen grain from the bare fields. Only then would they taste the pure flavor of rice and feel its solid goodness in their bellies. Just looking at the straw box made water rush into Trier's mouth. The man had paused in the road and hoisted the wooden jig higher on his back, shifting the cumbersome weight. As Trier stared, rice began to trickle out of a hole in the straw box. The trickle thickened and became a stream. Oblivious, the man continued on his way. For a few short moments, Trier's thoughts wrestled with one another. "Tell him quickly, before he loses too much rice." "No, don't say anything. You'll be able to pick up the fallen rice after he rounds the bend." Trier made his decision. He waited until the man had reached the bend in the road, and then he ran to catch him. "Honorable sir," Trier said, panting and bowing, "as I walked behind you, I noticed that you are marking your path with rice." The farmer turned and saw the trail behind him. A well-built man with broad, sun-tanned face, he pushed his straw hat back, scratched his head, and laughed ruefully. "Impatience," said the farmer. "I should have had this container woven with a double wall, but it would have taken more time. Now I pay for not waiting a bit longer." He struggled out of the jigga's straps and inspected the container. He prodded the straw to close the gap, but to no avail. So he threw his arms up in mock despair. Tree Ear grinned. He liked the farmer's easygoing nature. "Fetch me some new leaves, boy," said the farmer. Tree Ear complied, and the man stuffed them into the container as a temporary patch. The farmer squatted to don the jigga. As he started walking, he called over his shoulder, "Good deserves good, urchin. The rice on the ground is yours, if you can be troubled to gather it." "Many thanks, kind sir," Tree Ear bowed, very pleased with himself. He had made a lucky guess, and his waist pouch would soon be filled with rice. Tree Ear had learned from Crane Man's example. Foraging in the woods and rubbish heaps, gathering fallen grain heads in the autumn, these were honorable ways to garner a meal, requiring time and work. But stealing or begging, Crane Man said, made a man no better than a dog. "Work gives a man dignity, stealing takes it away," he often said. Following Crane Man's advice was not always easy for Tree Ear. Today, for example, it was stealing to wait, as Tree Ear had, for more rice to fall before alerting the man. Was it stealing to wait, as Tree Ear had, for more rice to fall before alerting the man that his rice bag was leaking? Did a good deed balance out the bad one? Tree Ear often pondered these kinds of questions, alone or in discussion with Crane Man. Such questions serve in two ways, Crane Man had explained. They keep a man's mind sharp and his thoughts off his empty stomach. Now, as always, he seemed to know Tree Ear's thoughts without hearing them spoken. "Tell me about this farmer," he said. "What kind of man is he?" Tree Ear considered the question for several moments, stirring his memory. At last he answered, "One who lacks patience," he said to himself. He had not wanted to wait for a sturdier container to be built. He could not be bothered to pick up the fallen rice. Tree Ear paused, but he laughed easily and even at himself. "If he were here now and heard you telling of waiting a little longer before speaking, what do you think he would say or do?" He would laugh," Tree Ear said, surprising himself with the speed of his response. Then more slowly, "I think he would not have minded." Crane Man nodded, satisfied, and Tree Ear thought of something his friend often said. Scholars read the great words of the world, but you and I must learn to read the world itself. Tree Ear was so called after the mushroom that grew in the wrinkled half-circles of dead or fallen tree trunks, emerging from the rotten wood without benefit of parent seed. A good name for an orphan, Crane Man said. If ever Tree Ear had another name, he no longer remembered it, nor the family that might have named him. Tree Ear shared the space under the bridge with Crane Man, or rather, Crane Man shared it with him. After all, Crane Man had been there first and would not be leaving anytime soon. The shriveled and twisted calf and foot he had been born with made sure of that. Tree Ear knew the story of his friend's name. "When they saw my leg at birth, it was thought I would not survive," Crane Man had said. "Then, as I went through life on one leg, it was said that I was like a crane, but besides standing on one leg, cranes are also a symbol of long life." True enough, Crane Man added. He had outlived all of his family and unable to work, had been forced to sell his possessions one by one, including at last the roof over his head. Thus, it was that he had come to live under the bridge. Once, a year or so earlier, Tree Ear had asked him how long he had lived there. Crane Man shook his head. He no longer remembered, but then he brightened and hobbled over to the side of the bridge, beckoning Tree Ear to join him. "I don't remember how long I've been here," he said, "but I know how long you have." And he pointed upward to the underside of the bridge. "I wonder that I have not shown you this before." On one side of the slats was a series of deep scratches, as if made with a pointed stone. Tree Ear examined them, then shook his head at Crane Man. "So? 1 mark for each spring since you came here, Crane Man explained. I kept count of your years, for I thought the time would come when you would like to know how old you are. Tree Ear looked again, this time with keen interest. There was a mark for each finger of both hands, 10 marks in all. Crane Man answered before Tree Ear could answer. No, you have more than 10 years, he said. Then, when you first came, I began marking those marks. You were in perhaps maybe your 2nd year, already on 2 legs and able to talk. Tree Ear nodded. He knew the rest of the story already. Crane Man had learned but little from the man who had brought Tree Ear to the bridge. The man had been paid by a kindly monk in the city of Songdo to bring Tree Ear to a little seaside village of Chulupo. Tree Ear's parents had died of fever, and the monk knew of an uncle in Chulupo. When the travelers arrived, the man discovered that the uncle no longer lived there. The house had been abandoned long before. He took Tree Ear to the temple on the mountainside, but the monks had been unable to take the boy in because fever raged there as well. The villagers told the man to take the child to the bridge where Crane Man would care for him until the temple was free of sickness. And, Crane Man always said, when a monk came to you to fetch you a few months later, you would not leave. You clung to my good leg like a monkey to a tree, not crying, but not letting go either. The monk went away. You stayed. When Tree Ear was younger, he had asked for the story often, as if hearing it over and over might reveal something more. What his father's trade had been, what his mother had looked like, where his uncle had gone. But there was never anything more. It no longer mattered. If there was more to having a home than Crane Man and a bridge, Tree Ear had neither knowledge of it or need of it. Breakfast that morning was a feast. A bit of rice boiled to a gruel in a cast-off earthenware pot, served up in a bowl carved from a gourd, and Crane Man produced yet another surprise to add in the meal: 2 chicken leg bones. No flesh remained on the arid bones, but the 2 friends cracked them open and worried away every scrap of marrow from inside. Afterwards, Tree Ear washed in the river and fetched a gourd of water for Crane Man, who never went into the river if he could help it. He hated getting his feet wet. Then Tree Ear set about tidying up the area under the bridge. He took care to keep the place neat, for he disliked having to clear a space to sleep at the tired end of a day. Housekeeping complete, Tree Ear left his companion and set off up the road. This time he did not zigzag between rubbish heaps, but strode purposely towards a small house set apart from others to a curve in the road. Tree Ear slowed as he neared the mud and wood structure. He tilted his head, listening and grinning when the droning syllables of a song chant reached his ears. The master potter Min was singing, which meant that it was throwing day. Min's house backed onto the beginnings of the foothills and their brushy growth, which gave way to pine-wooded mountains beyond. Tree Ear swung wide of the house. Under the deep eaves at the back, Min kept his potter's wheel. He was there now, his gray head bent over the wheel, chanting his wordless song. Tree Ear made his way cautiously to his favorite spot behind the tree whose low branches kept him hidden from view. He peeped through the leaves and caught his breath in delight. Min was just beginning a new pot. Min threw a mass of clay, about the size of a cabbage, onto the center of the wheel. He picked it up and threw it several times. After one last throw, he sat down and stared at the clay for a moment. Using his foot to spin the base of the wheel, he placed dampened hands on the sluggardly lump, and for the 100th time, Tree Ear watched the miracle. In only a few moments, the clay rose and fell, grew taller, then rounded down until it curved into a perfect symmetry. The spinning slowed, the chant too died out and became a mutter of words that Tree Ear could not hear. Min sat up straight, he crossed his arms and leaned back a little as if to see the vase from a distance. Turning the wheel slowly with his knees, he inspected the graceful shape for invisible faults. Then, he shook his head, and in a single motion of disgust, scooped up the clay and slapped it back down onto the wheel, whereupon it collapsed into an oafish lump. Trier opened his mouth to let out his breath silently, only then realizing that he had been keeping it back. To his eyes, the vase had been perfect, its width half its height, its curves like those of a flower petal. Why, he wondered, had Min found it unworthy? What had he seen that so displeased him? Min never failed to reject his first attempt. Then he would repeat the whole process. This day, Trier was able to watch the clay rise and fall 4 times before Min was satisfied, almost done. Each of the 4 efforts had looked identical to Trier, but something about the 4th pleased Min. He took the length of twine and slipped it deftly under the vase to release it from the wheel, then placed the vase carefully on the tray to dry. As Trier crept away, he counted the days on his fingers. He knew the potter's routine well. It would be many days before another throwing day. The village of Chul-Opo faced the sea. Its back was to the mountains and the river edging it like a neat seam. Its potters produced the delicate celadon. Is that correct? Does anyone want to correct me on that? Celadon? Okay. Celadon ware that had achieved fame not only in Korea but as far away as the court of the Chinese emperor. Chul-Upo had become an important village for ceramics by virtue of both its location and its soil. On the shore of the Western Sea, it had access both to the easiest sea route northward and to plentiful trade with China, and the clay from the village pits contained exactly the right amount of iron to produce the exquisite gray-green color of celadon so prized by collectors. Trier knew every potter in the village, but until recently, he had known them only for their rubbish heaps. It was hard for him to believe that he had never taken the time to watch them at work before. In recent years, the pottery from the village kilns had gained great favor among those wealthy enough to buy pieces as gifts for both the royal court and the Buddhist temples, and the potters had achieved new levels of prosperity. The pickings from the rubbish heap had become richer in consequence, and for the first time, Trier was able to forget about his stomach for a few hours each day. During those hours, it was Min he chose to watch most closely. The other potters kept their wheels in small, windowless shacks, but in the warm months, Min preferred to work beneath the eaves behind his house, open to the breeze and to the view of the mountains. Working without walls meant that Min possessed great skill and confidence to match. Potters guarded their secrets jealousy. A new shape for a teapot, a new inscribed design, these were things that the potters refused to reveal until a piece was ready to show or buy. Min did not seem to care about such secrecy. It was as if he was saying, "Go ahead, watch me, no matter. You will not be able to imitate my skill." And it was true. And it was also the main reason that Trier loved watching Min. His work was the finest in the region, perhaps in the whole country. Now this is a lesson taken directly out of the DLG, including the questions that I would like to pose to you guys right now. You guys can just respond here. So this is a conversation that I would just have my students to gain kind of a little bit of understanding on your screens if you want to. And I'm going to go ahead and let you actually do that. Now I think I actually have to let it start, right? Here we go. I think there's a minute timer on there. A lot of times when I put timers on, I tell my students, you have to write for a minute, for as close to a minute as possible. If you want to, you're welcome to. Did anything strike you as unique or interesting about the writing? You got about 40 seconds left. You don't have to do this. You can. It serves as I'll just kind of show you how it can serve as a basis for good conversation. And the type of conversation you would want to have with your students during whole group instruction. I have several of these questions, but we're not going to, in the interest of time, we're not going to go through all of them. I'll let you read the questions because they're taken right out of the DLG, and you could see kind of the merits of just using that as a program too. Just about 5 seconds here. Yeah, the dialogue was very unique. I agree with that. The style and the content. Yeah, the setting and the scenery were very descriptive. I agree. It had a very interesting introduction. Yeah, that's true, good setting. Okay, so the next question here, we're not gonna, I don't wanna, there's a lot of them, but it says, do you have any questions about the story so far? Why do you think the author chose not to tell the story in chronological order? I like having this conversation with my students too, because often it goes into what we're doing in Writer's Workshop. We talk about good ways to start stories. A great way to start a story is almost never right at the beginning, right? It's like a flashback, description of a scene or whatever. That's a great way to engage a reader. And I think the author is just employing that strategy. What's that? Yeah, exactly. What did the first chapter tell us about Crane Man and Tree Ear? So we're evaluating if they were listening. What are your feelings on the main conflict of the story after reading just the first chapter? We can even talk about what that conflict is, the importance of conflict in a story. Again, that's a skill that you can emulate when you're doing your own writing. Of course, conflict is where most of a story's life lives, right, in the conflict. What does it tell us about Tree Ear? That his morning routine involves exploring rubbish heaps. What's the significance of Min not working in secret? These are just, were you listening? And then students could respond, we could have conversations. Again, all of these questions are taken right out of the DLGs. This is a great resource. What moral or ethical decision did Tree Ear have to deal with? Obviously, remember that. Do I tell him? Do I not tell him? So that is a lesson taken directly out of the DLG for whole group instruction. Can you see how in grades 5 through 8, that's where reading instruction is going to happen in the whole group? If you're not having these types of conversations with your students in 5th through 8th grade, then they're not going to develop the relationship they need to develop with text to help them be successful, certainly in academia, right? Because think about it, as they go into high school, their freshman English class is going to be asking lots of questions about what is the author saying here? What literary device are they employing here? When they cross the river, are they really just crossing a river, or is it a symbol of baptism? Symbolism, we talk about that. Trust me, there are kids that come into that world in high school ready to go. And there are kids that sit down for the first time in high school English class and they're like, what's a metaphor? What is a metaphor? And obviously, none of us would produce students that do that. But if we don't, you can see if we're not doing explicit direct instruction with our 5th through 8th graders and whole group instruction like we just did there, man, they're going to miss out. They're going to miss out so much in being prepared to do well for the rest of their academic careers, really. Sorry, did you have a quick question?
I have a question. If I were a student,
Yeah.
I enjoyed listening to you, but if I were a student, I'm going to be working with 3rd and 4th grade.
Sure.
Would it be wrong for me to, as I'm reading a book like that, stop and at certain parts of the book and say, what is happening?
Totally.
Because if we just read straight through.
Yeah, so this is a higher level reading book. They would also have it as well and be reading along with me.
Okay.
But lower grade students, absolutely. It's a complete, whole group instruction for the lower grades looks very different than this.
Okay.
Yeah. And you would definitely stop maybe every page.
Yeah, because then at the end, so that at least they understand what happened from this part to this part, so then at the end I can ask them a question and they will remember.
A lot of I stop all the time with lower grade students in whole group instruction because I want to help them to learn strategies that they're going to learn later in not reading workshop. More direct, explicit reading instruction like in phonics. I'll have them, for example, identify pictures in the book that also are written down in the text too. And there's lots of opportunities that you should be using to stop.
Okay.
But this is a higher end level. But in 3rd and 4th, yes, definitely. Do you have a question, Chris?
Is there any merit to starting the reading with the questions, not asking
Absolutely.
them to answer it, but giving them here's the questions, let's take that with us into the reading so that
Yeah.
we can find the answer they do.
Definitely merit in that.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
Those questions that you had up there for us, those were your questions, right? That weren't in the book or anything? It's
No,
a-
those were in the book.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's make sure.
Yeah, no, they have, I would say especially for the 5th or 8th grade, they have really good content for whole group instruction stuff. Yeah.
To what extent do you as a teacher read or have your students read out loud? Because I started like in the middle of the year last year, 5th and 6th grade, and I kind of followed the practice of the previous teachers and had the students read, and they're, you know, all over the place as far as their ability to read well, and some of them it was actually painful to listen to.
Right.
And then I'm thinking, well, the rest of the class, then if, you know, they're going to be held back in a way by the poor reading of whoever might be reading. So
Yeah.
sometimes I would read, sometimes I would have them read. So I tried to mix it up a little, but I was just wondering what your
Yeah.
recommendation was.
I've really gotten to a place now with reading instruction as a teacher where I only take volunteers for oral reading. See, the oral reading production is a skill within itself that is actually, there's not much evidence to really correlate how well a student reads out loud with actually how much they're retaining. And so it's almost an unfair assessment on a student's reading ability, because what you're really doing is assessing their levels of anxiety. Is really what you're doing. And so my policy now is I never make oral reading, oral production of a text an aspect of my reading instruction, because most of the time it's misunderstood. Even though there is merit to it, it's mostly misinterpreted as a threat to students, as a test, and it really doesn't, it's not really a fair, equitable assessment on how well they're doing. So I think it's okay to have students read out loud, but I would have them volunteer to do it. The challenge is that you do have kids who want to read, and you're like, oh, maybe not. And so I often, when I do oral reading stuff, I usually read out in it. And then if they have reading to do, they do it independently. We come back together and discuss the excerpts that they read together.
Or volunteers or someone who takes it.
Yeah.
I had a boy who was a straight-A student, so he obviously was understanding, but he was a terrible oral reader.
Yeah,
But you know, and everything else, he was straight A.
right.
So,
Well, he may be a really good content area reader. Yeah. And good for him, too, by the way. That's awesome. So small group instruction, this is where guided reading instruction, that was the word I was looking for, guided reading instruction lives. And this is where the bulk of explicit reading instruction for 1 through 4 happens. Now, I kind of said this before, and I'm going to say it again. I put it in red, too. But this is really, really important for you guys. If you fail to do small group reading instruction for your lower graders, kindergartners, 1st, 2nd graders, I would say even 3rd graders too, because you're going to have some students in 3rd grade who are in a position of needing remediation, okay? But if you fail to do that, Pathways will not serendipitously produce readers, okay? If you are not doing explicit direct reading instruction in small groups to your kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd graders, Pathways, the program, will not produce readers. And I have a word of advice for you here as it pertains to students in those lower grades, okay? If, I don't know if I'm in a position to give you permission to do this, so this is a suggestion, okay? I know that I'm not in a position to give you permission to do this, but here's a suggestion, okay? If you are struggling to do both whole group and small group instruction with your lower grade students, I would ask you to focus on putting your time and energy into creating thoughtful small group programs and interventions, and then start to introduce elements of whole group instruction slowly. So that means that if you're torn between sitting down with your 1st and 2nd grader and going through your anchor text, or doing direct explicit instruction with guided reading, and you're struggling to balance between those two, pour your time and energy into guided reading and incorporate components of whole group instruction, anchor text stuff, as you can. But I would not sacrifice the content you need to do in small group reading in the name of doing whole group instruction with kindergarten, first, and second graders. They're going to learn important aspects and ideas about literacy and important concepts about text in whole group instruction. I believe the remediation that will be required there will be much easier than the remediation they're going to need if they miss out on guided reading, small group, explicit, direct instruction in reading. So if you're getting this program off the ground and you're struggling between that whole group and small group instruction, give yourself I would suggest that you focus your time and energy in creating a really, really thoughtful and valuable small group reading instruction program, guided reading. I'm really talking about students in first, second, and third grade, okay? Kindergarten, first, and second. Any kindergartner? Okay, yeah, wow. Yeah, that's so important, that small group stuff. It's not that the whole group isn't, it's just that small group piece. If you want there to be readers, it needs to happen. Small group instruction is still there. I mean, it's still, and every week. Don't skip the box. The box is great. If you go through the week and you want to look at some of the content that's written out here in more detail, that's great. But if you want to plan, that week at a glance is so important. And here you can see that the small group instruction says that you should be doing some small group rotations and also independent reading as well. And I kind of highlighted this box right here, and it says select texts according to students' instructional reading levels. These texts will be used in direct explicit instruction to students in small groups, guided reading, while other students are engaged in independent reading activities. Note that small groups and independent reading happen at the same time. So that means that as you go into your classrooms here and you start getting set up, you really need to start thinking about setting up literacy centers in your classroom. And the big important piece of this is don't just put texts in a corner and tell a kid to go and choose a book, right? These literacy centers should have leveled content. I've used like a color-coded thing so kids could know, oh, if it's red, it's for me. I'm an emergent reader. I'm learning. So they are self-selecting, right? They are self-selecting, but they're self-selecting out of appropriate content. The reason it's nice to have small group and independent reading groups running at the same time or simultaneously is that it gives you the opportunity to do direct explicit instruction to students while your other students are engaged in valuable academic pursuits. Okay? And so, but that doesn't happen again serendipitously. That requires some planning and some thought, okay? Another really great guided reading resource that I love is Reading A to Z. And in fact, I think that Pathways at some point, and you'll have to forgive me, it's been a few years since I've taught the lower end of this, and I taught it as Pathways 1, and then they changed it over to Pathways 2.0. I don't know if it's like Apple, or at some point we're going to be like Pathways, what are we at now in Apple? 15? 11? I don't know. But it did get better, especially in the world of writing workshop, which I'll talk about this afternoon. But the Writing A to Z books are those stapled together books. They're all leveled. Again, that's great. And I have an example here that I will share with you. I think you can click on it, but you probably will have to log in. So don't worry about clicking on it. But here's an example here. This is, again, level F for 6 and 7-year-olds. Maybe, technically, right? But you may have students that are 6 or 7 and unable to read this. But again, this has a whole list of resources for you. It has worksheets that go along with the lesson. This is a digital copy of the book, but it has a projectable version of the book, so you can do direct instruction together with students. They can have it on their laps. And this is a great resource to use for guided reading. See, the next slide here, I think, actually has the book. I'll have to log in. And I would go through a guided reading lesson like this with my students. Hey, we're looking at this book here. They'd have it on their laps. A lot of times they take them on a picture walk, right? I think I talked about this. I love this book because it does go through high frequency words in the text, so you can kind of prime them a little bit ahead of time. Hey, we're going to see the word corners in here. We're going to see this word dead end. These are words that are important to the story, at least in terms of understanding the meaning of the text that they may not have a lot of exposure to. Everywhere, roller coaster, tunnel, winds, okay? And then I would say, okay, what do you see on this page? Roads, right? I see a road. And then I'd ask, do you see the word road anywhere on this page? Oh yeah, right there. Of course you do. Were you raising your hand?
Oh, no, sorry.
You good? No. I thought you saw the word road on the page. I was like, good for you. Fantastic. Yeah, so I could highlight it here. Yeah, roads. There's more than one, so there's an S on the end. So we got, oh, here's road. So we got it 4 times. So just priming them that way too. What do you see here? What is the road doing here? You can kind of guide them. I see it kind of, is it turning? Oh yeah, it is turning. Do you see the word turning on the page? I see it right here. Oh, there's also different words you could have them come out. So I kind of go on a picture walk. I try to tie high frequency words or important words to the pictures that are on there. Oh, what is this? Does that look like the city or the country? I can see the city in the background. What's up here? The country. Oh, there's the word country. I also see do you guys see a city? Yeah, do you see the word city on the page? Yeah. So what this is helpful to, I mean, obviously reading begins as the process of decoding, and I think this is, did I say this is a first grade level? So the assumption here at level F is that they're capable of reading independently. So they're past like decoding, right, and chunking. They're reading kind of fluently now. But the purpose of this type of lesson is to teach students the idea that reading can happen very quickly by looking at a word as a set of symbols which represent a word. An example I play with my students sometimes to prove this to them is I'll write a word on the board and I'll cover it with a piece of paper and then I'll just like that fast, boom. And they're like, oh, I know what it is, right? And what I'm doing is I'm proving to them that they've moved past the decoding, right? The turtle talk, the sounding it out. And now they're recognizing a set of letters in sequential order is just a code for a word that they know. And this is just a way of kind of reinforcing that. Do you see a road? Do you see a city? Do you see the word city? Oh yeah, it's right here. So they can recognize an entire word city without sounding it out. It's just a strategy. But you can go through here and I'll go here to the end. You could do that with hills, couldn't you, on this one? I don't think the roller coaster is going to work on that one. But what I like here at the end of this is it has connections for writing and even social studies too. And just a side note here, I'm looking at my time, but man, let me give you guys, I don't want to overwhelm you with this. And there is someone teaching on thematic units, right? Mm-hmm. Has that already happened? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you know. And I'm sure, in my opinion, writing, reading, and history can be taught as a single thematic concept and idea. It's so much fun. We had, have you heard of the author Avi? Okay, so we were reading one of his books, Crispin, and we were studying about the Dark Ages in history, and then my students were writing historical fiction for writing workshop, and then he actually came, well, I teach online, so he came and talked to our students at the end of it, so that was just a really fun experience for them. Super nice gentleman, actually. One of my students did annoy him, but in the most brilliant way. She kept asking him what his favorite pizza toppings were. And I'm like, we have a world-class author here. And she wouldn't let it go. It just every time, yes, mushrooms or whatever. And he's like, and finally, I kid you not, guys, he says to this girl, he says, the pizza questions are falling flat. And he just was straight faced. And everyone was like, oh, she just got shut down by Avi. And then she goes, flat like a pizza? Yeah. And he laughed. And I was like, A for you, Cadence. Okay, good times, flat like a pizza. That was bold. A to Z, this is don't worth trying to look at this. What I'll tell you what this is this book comes along with all these reading strategies along with it. on their online resource. It talks about ways to tie in different skills with phonemes. It talks about the phonics tie in there with initial consonant sound C. It talks about grammar and mechanics and all these things that can be taught sort of along with this book. And so I think it's a great resource, A to Z. There are other guided reading resources that you can look to, but I think there's some merit in utilizing a program. Again, the old adage of the wheel not needing to be reinvented, I think is appropriate to keep in mind here. So, there's very little guidance for the DLG in the upper grades, I already said that. For group reading instruction, for small group reading instruction. In fact, if you went in to most of these and looked for the whole group, for small group instruction, it would be a little annoying. Select students according to students' instructional levels. Yeah. In addition to the reading foundation standard. So there's not a lot of guidance, and that's okay. We already talked about that, right? In 5 through 8, that small group reading instruction is really about them being able to learn the enjoyment of reading. And that 1 through 4 explicit reading instruction is really, really important. So that's why I put students in 5 through 8 grade need explicit instruction in the focus areas outlined in whole group instruction, which is the activity we did with Tree here and Potter Min and that single shard. So just bear that in mind. 1 through 4 explicit reading instruction, small groups. In 5 through 8, it happens in the whole group. Yes?
If you can answer. So when we're teaching whole group and we have 2 classes, do we teach the same book to both grade levels?
So you're in an odd year this year.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the thematic unit? Are you talking about the anchor text?
Yes.
So what grade are you teaching, just so I'm answering this? 3rd and 4th? I'm going to punt this to Emily.
I mean, I know that I combined 3 and 4 in my London school. So the nice thing about teaching in a 2-grade classroom is that you could teach 2 books, but I'm going to punt this over to the superintendent just to make sure that you know. 'Cause
Okay, I feel better about my answer now then, Emily. So you're teaching 3rd and 4th? I would teach 3rd.
yeah,
I would just teach the 3rd grade anchor text.
yeah.
Was that what you do, Jody?
I was just gonna say, you teach one book,
Yeah.
whole class, and then, yeah.
Because that whole group instruction piece is, I would argue, if you had students, if you want to teach a 3rd grade anchor text, because you love the anchor text in 3rd grade, you could do that through 8th grade. There's content in those whole group instructions that would be beneficial for students across the spectrum. Yeah,
So
Emily.
it's just first and second that are recommended to be taught?
Yes.
separately?
Yeah, the challenge with first and second is that the assumptions about the content embedded within those DLGs about a first grader are very, very different than what a second grader is capable of doing. So if you're teaching in a 1 and 2 split, then I would be very cautious to make sure you're covering the content that is independent for those grade groups, but that's not the situation you're in. Yes?
Does this program come with benchmark assessments? Like, how do I know what level they
I'm gonna talk, there's a whole portion of assessments, yeah. Both formative and summative assessments are part of the program as well. So formative, like little checks, make sure they're on the
At the beginning of
case.
the school year, I want to know, are they level F at reading or whatever? Does it?
Oh, so yeah, so it does come with a resource that helps you level your students. Yeah. It's the big red, what's the big red book? Which one?
Jerry Jones.
Yeah, the Jerry Johns. I would argue there's easier ways to do it than Jerry Johns.
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's a bit, it's a valuable resource. It's a little antiquated. It's good.
And if you don't have it?
I think that if at any point you're coming into a school that got all the components of the program, the Jerry Johns, the red and blue book, like a red dot appears on my chest. You should have it, because there's other resources in there that you may find very valuable too. All right. So I like how I allowed for a single question at the end there. Question. It sounded like I was going to ask you a question. I was trying to invite you as I pushed up my glasses. Question. All right, Dr. Horton, I'm finished for now. You're very welcome.